So I just wanted to make a video talking about how I actually miss HBO. Obviously, HBO exited boxing because of a variety of reasons. Obviously, one of the reasons was that there was new competitors on the scene, and HBO just didn't want to compete. So you obviously had DAZN, you had these obviously Showtime, you had the BBC Fox deal, and their viewing figures were going down. And to be fair, in hindsight, they did the right thing. If you look at a lot of companies and such, right, when the product is nowhere near as good as it once was, they usually just stubbornly carry on. They don't face reality that they're nowhere near what they once was. And I think HBO did the right thing in exiting boxing the way they did, because they exited in a graceful way where they left us with happy memories, but it never felt like they exited at a time where they got completely destroyed by the competition, like DAZN and such. And then they exited just before DAZN and all these other platforms came on the scenes, so it made it look like a seamless transition. And in hindsight, HBO is doing really well now financially. Obviously, you've got HBO Max, so they're making a lot of money from actually airing movies, streaming movies, and doing all this other stuff that they're doing. They're making a hell of a lot of money through that, as opposed to the money that they would have lost if they stayed in boxing. But one thing I do miss about HBO was its production value. If you watch HBO, it felt like a premier event. Now, don't get it twisted, I'm not ragging on DAZN and such, but with DAZN, obviously they're a new entrant in the market. HBO's been around for like 30, 40, 50 years before it exited. But the fact is, like, DAZN just doesn't have that premier feel to it. Like, when it was a HBO pay-per-view, you felt it. Like when Ricky Hatton fought on pay-per-view, you felt that. Like, there's a certain atmosphere to it. The production value was very high. On top of that, you had the chemistry that the commentators, the broadcasters had with each other. You had Jim Lampley, you had Larry Merchant, you had obviously Roy Jones and George Foreman and Emmanuel Stewart, and it felt genuine. It felt real. You can tell these people loved boxing. Nowadays with DAZN and such, they're getting pretty faces there, like Maya Jama. I'm not gonna try ragging on her, but the fact is, like, she's not a person that has a real passion for boxing. I don't think. I think she's someone who's obviously popular, so they're trying to appeal to the younger demographic, but obviously she's attractive, so they're trying to get young guys to look at her. But it's not the same as, like, it doesn't feel as genuine as like HBO, when like you had someone like Larry Merchant who's been following the sport for the last 30 years. You had people like Jim Lampley, you had Max Kellerman. It felt genuine when you watched it, and it felt like it was awesome. On top of that, you had the HBO 24/7 series as well, which was amazing. The 24/7 series was probably one of the best things to be on HBO, apart from the fights themselves. Obviously, you had HBO Boxing After Dark as well, and on there you had legendary fights. Like, remember the Mayweather era, the Pacquiao era, the Ricky Hatton era. I mean, even Joe Calzaghe fought on pay-per-view in HBO as well. I mean, you had the Roy Jones era, you had the Bernard Hopkins era, you had the Kelly Pavliks, the Jermaine Taylors. Obviously, Golovkin was on there, Canelo was on there. It felt real. And then obviously you had the 80s, like obviously the Mike Tysons, you had the Larry Holmes, you had the Marvin Haglers, the Thomas Hearns, the Sugar Ray Leonards. I mean, HBO was, I think it might be, it's right to say that HBO is probably the best boxing broadcaster that there's ever been. If you take into account the product that we got now with DAZN and the Fox PBC brand and all of that, and Showtime to some extent. Showtime was a huge competitor of HBO back in the day, but I don't think they even come close to how it felt when HBO was around. I mean, just everything about it was just on point. I'm not saying they didn't have their flaws, they did. Obviously, I felt like Larry Merchant and Jim Lampley were very biased towards black fighters, so when Vasyl Lomachenko was very technically gifted and showed extreme boxing skills, they were absolutely enthralled with it. But then when Rigondeaux would do the same thing, or when Roy Jones would do the same thing and would seamlessly destroy his opponent with skill, or Mayweather would do the same thing, they'll be called boring. So they weren't perfect, but you felt there was a heart and a passion there. With these new broadcasters, you don't really feel that. You don't feel like they really care as much about it as us fans do, and they to some extent were fans of the sport. Obviously you had legendary fighters like Roy Jones who joined the broadcast team. It just felt like an event, right? And I'll be honest, I feel like boxing is lacking that these days. Even with the Canelo events and all of that, it just doesn't feel as premier. Even though they're on DAZN and they're doing a thing, they're making millions on pay-per-view and all of that, it still doesn't feel quite as premier as back in the HBO days. The HBO days, I think, were special, and I think they'll probably hold a special place in my heart because I remember them fights, watching it. Obviously, you had Michael Buffer as well, doing his ring announcement. It might have been Bruce Buffer or Michael Buffer, I can't remember because he's got a brother that's in the UFC as well. But one of the Buffers that used to do boxing, I think it's Michael Buffer, when he would do Let's Get Ready to Rumble, it felt genuine. But now that he does it on DAZN, it doesn't feel as right. I feel like HBO was something special. HBO was definitely special. And yeah, I definitely miss it. I miss them watching them fight nights, HBO Boxing After Dark, all of that sort of, all of them events that we used to have, and obviously the soundtrack as well. Remember the ending of the 24/7 series, whether it's Pacquiao versus Marquez, Floyd Mayweather versus Ricky Hatton. The ending of the 24/7 series was so entertaining. They were so fun to watch. It was just must-watch TV. It was so fun. But nowadays, I just feel like the product is a bit more dry. It's not as premier. But I feel like HBO did make the right decision to bow out when they did. They just knew they couldn't compete with all these other competitors on the market, and they knew their viewing figures were dropping and their subscription rate was not as high. So they bowed out gracefully rather than just carrying on with a decrease in product. But I do miss them days. It reminds me of if you look at the show The Simpsons is still airing to this day, and the product is nowhere near as good as it was back in the day, in the 90s and the 80s and all of that, when The Simpsons was first around. The product was amazing. I remember the old Simpson episodes that used to come on that were amazing, like the 3rd season, the 4th season, the 5th season. But nowadays it's just complete garbage. It's completely lost its sense of humor. And you got things like Family Guy that are much more popular and better. They produce a better product. Obviously Rick and Morty and all these other shows. But if the Simpsons had the foresight to bow out when they were on top, when they knew their viewing figures were just decreasing and they weren't quite as good as what they once was, then I think the Simpsons would have become a legacy show. It would have been like the Friends. They would have had reruns of it constantly playing, and it would have still been a very popular series. But because they kept carrying on, the product just kept decreasing and decreasing and decreasing, and then eventually it died a slow death where nobody even watches The Simpsons anymore. It still airs. It probably gets decent viewing figures, but it doesn't get what it used to get back in the day. So yeah, sometimes you got to know when to bow out, and I think the HBO did it at the right time. So yeah, I just want to congratulate the team in HBO, and obviously for giving me the best memories of boxing that I've ever had in a long time. So yeah, that's just my thoughts. Tell me your thoughts, and what was your favourite fights on HBO? Tell me what you think about this post and this video, and like and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. Peace out.